So we've had the cost and technical based discussion, so I guess what I'm here to do is turn that into a little bit of a value based discussion. And how we're doing that, most simply, is we're going to use a single straw man concept to illustrate what the value would likely be if we use traditional methodologies, traditional thinking, traditional costing. And that's on the basis of this two producers back to a single manifold and tied back to an existing host. The costs have been talked to in more detail and with more experience than I can. But essentially, the existing tieback, and we've included DrillX, is 211 million cost. First tieback of the future using new technologies, new ways of thinking. We already see a cost and ABIS reduction. And consequently, if we're talking about reused equipment, you're obviously going to get a significant additional saving when you have more than one development. This uses things like, for example, assumptions on cost reductions around fishing interactions, over-trawlable structures not being there. The best way to reduce your ABIS cost is not have it there in the first place. Reuse of pipe, etc., etc. The process we've taken to apply this is actually an iterative process where you look at your inputs, you run it through a valuation process, reach your outputs and store any available data. The purpose, position and setup of OGTC means we can effectively avoid the first two stages we would normally go through, which is identifying goals and strategies, and move straight on to economic modelling, strategy development, and looking at the risks and how we can overcome them. The regime we've used is the UK regime. We're talking about a UK conversation. 10% discount rate from 2017. We're in 2017, 10% is a fairly common discount rate to use. 2.5% inflation rate, and we've got $40 and $50 price scenarios. And at this point, that's given you the boring background. What we're going to do is have a look at some live modelling and hopefully swap to that. So this is the model we've used. And we start with our base case scenario. So if we look at a single existing thinking base case, and I apologise in advance for the clumsiness of my mouse work, we start with an NPV of just under 4 million and a rate of return of 11%. And for most investors, that's not going to pass their screening hurdles. So we need to improve on that. So if we introduce some of the new thinking of the tieback of the future on a single case, we actually managed to increase that to a 33 million NPV and an almost 25% IRR, and that is investable. We're not only talking about a single development and making it more competitive, we're talking about several chain developments where we can see significant cost reductions and reuse of equipment. And again, to illustrate the tieback of the future as a competitor to existing thinking, let's give the existing thinking the best head start we can. So let's assume if we take similar developments 4 times, and we just assume we can develop all of these simultaneously with no additional cost, that we can get the rigs and so on. We do see that we've got just shy of 50 million of NPV. That is competitive. The IRR isn't as attractive, but it might pass screening hurdles. But what we also see is our upfront capital spend is huge. The exposure to any failures is huge. There's significant associated risk. We want to avoid that. We also see that in a $40 oil world, we go from a positive NPV to quite a significantly negative one, and we've got all this upfront sunk cost, and we can't turn back. So what's our alternative? Well, we look at the tieback of the future. We look at a chain of developments. And what we've done with the tieback of the future is we have assumed 6 years between developments to allow reuse of equipment. At $50 oil, we managed to go from a 50 million development with a 13% IRR to over 100 million of NPV with a 28% IRR or 27% IRR. Already a significant improvement on what we can get. What we also find is in our stress case of $40 oil, we remain NPV positive and we retain a competitive IRR. So that means that not only are we talking about something that's investable, we're talking about something that actually remains fairly robust in a lower price environment. So it's we can flex test. So when we look at this, we look at it iteratively and we think about the problems and risks that may be associated. We've spoken about commercial models. Eric mentioned the commercial models and so have others. If you assume that one of those companies owns kit and then reuses it, you've got all kinds of transfer of ownership issues, you've got all kinds of who's responsible for refurbishment. So it's the simple commercial structure that would solve this would be if an external party were to lease that equipment to these companies. It's reusable. What would that look like? So in effect, we came up with some cases. Again, using 6 years between each of the developments to allow the same kit to be reused. And at $50 oil, which is the one we really care about, we find that our NPV is 85 million and our IRR is 28. Now the first thing that's going to spring to mind is, well, that's lower than the 101 we had previously. But there's a couple of things to be aware of here. The actual capital exposure of the companies, perhaps smaller companies who don't have the ability to invest that capital up front, is much less. There's a third party who is taking some value out of this deal in terms of leasing. They may be a third party that's got spare capacity that allows them to see economies of scale in fabricating that equipment. They may have a lower cost of ownership, etc. So we've got something that, whilst the NPV for the individual partners is slightly lower, there is value out there for a potential new industry in the sector where someone's leasing this reusable equipment. But if we take that assumption to its next logical level and assume a blue sky scenario, if you've got a third party that owns and leases the equipment, why would you have to wait 6 years between developments? Because you're not necessarily reusing the same single piece of kit. You simply have a company who's perhaps got a subsea warehouse that allows them to store and reuse the non-bespoke interchangeable kit. So let's take that to its next logical step, or what I feel is a logical step, and say we don't actually have to wait 6 years between developments. We can do them at a 2-year interval. And we actually find that we've got an NPV of 116 million and an IRR of 29, close to 29. So with this external leasing agency, whether it be a major contractor or someone else, who's able to lease reusable equipment to these companies to enable the development, we've managed to take something that was a 50 million at best development when stacked using existing thinking to something that's 116 million, 117 million NPV and 29% IRR and is very, very investable. And not only that, it creates a sustainable, ongoing culture within the UKCS to develop. And I think that's a very exciting proposal. So on that, that's demonstrated the economic modelling we've done and the conclusions that we've reached thus far. It's not the end of the conversation. It's a straw man for us to have further discussion around. But if we switch back to the PowerPoint, we can just draw a couple of conclusions, I hope. Here we are. So the conclusions we would draw from that: if we implement new technologies and techniques, we can provide demonstrable added value just on a basic level. On a single development, we see an improvement in NPV. If we phase that development and utilise synergies and circular economies, there's further demonstrable added value. If we then incorporate new commercial structures to allow leasing of capital and equipment, we can create a new market for the UKCS, and we can also add value to phased developments. And full exploitation of opportunities requires this fresh approach to commercial thinking. So however we do this, however we formulate the commercial structures to provide access to this, what is demonstrable value, the better we can get. So by working together and thinking about how we do this, we can hopefully achieve some maximised economic recovery, to use the buzz term, and take things forward. And that's all from ABIS.